Welcome to the 15th annual Design for Drupal Boston. My name is Patrick Corbett. I'm a volunteer here at D4D along with Leslie Glynn, who will cover announcements in just a second. For those of you who are new, I see some new names on the list. To Design for Drupal, this is an annual event that we typically have annually devoted to Drupal design, UX, and front-end development, as well as the business and process challenges facing Drupal teams. We're typically in person, and we typically do that, like I said, yearly, every summer in Boston, Massachusetts. In its place, during COVID, we've been having monthly webinars like this one on various Drupal design and front-end topics. The good news is, however, we're pleased to announce that this year we're going to be holding our event in person. We appreciate your patience while we try to nail down a venue that we can afford and that is available when we need it to be. We already have a keynote identified, and we are very close to signing the contract on the venue. The dates are looking like late July or possibly early August, but we're thinking late July is really where we're going to land. So please stay tuned for more information on that, and Leslie can fill us in on any details once she comes back on. We are supported by a great team of volunteers here, including Catherine Carruthers, who handles all of our video recordings. Thank you, Catherine. Catherine Waldron, who manages our social media and mailings. Thank you, Catherine. Donna Bungard, who is handling sponsorships this year. Thank you, Donna. And Aubrey Sambor, who is providing website support, which has been much needed. Thank you, Aubrey. I will now turn things over to Leslie for some announcements.
Great, thank you, Patrick, and thank you everybody for joining. Really good crowd, and we're really, glad that you continue to join us for these monthly webinars. I do have a QR code and a link to the slides here for you if you'd like to, keep these announcement slides. All right, so today we have a webinar, New Things We Love and More Things We Want in CSS. We're pleased to welcome Adam Varn and Aubrey Sambor to Design for Drupal to speak on this great topic. Patrick will be introducing both of them shortly. Last year's keynote was, we did have a virtual event, as Patrick said. We had a keynote developing sustainable empathy systems with Sharon Steed. There's a link in the slide deck to the recording if you missed that and would like to catch up on last year's keynote. There are also links on our website to the past, since 2018, all of our keynotes. So feel free to go back and take a look at any of those very good keynotes that we've had. We did have a contribution event last year during our virtual event. We always try to have a section of our conference devoted to contributing back to Drupal. There are different things here where you can go to the different Slack channels, project browser, contribution events, admin UI, D9 theme. Those are the different hashtags on the Drupal Slack channel. There are many ways to contribute. Just reach out if you would like to contribute. Anybody can contribute, whether you're doing design, front end, theming, coding, accessibility, anything, UX, anything that you would like to work on. There's a place for you to work contributing back to the Drupal project. And there is mentors available, so just reach out and somebody will guide you through the process and help you along. Upcoming webinar series. So this is our April webinar. In May, we have Mercury Editor, the drag and drop Drupal publisher, and how designers can benefit from using it. And that's with Justin Tupin and Ken Woodworth from Atten. We're going to take a break in June and July because we're getting set up for our in-person event. So we probably won't have the webinars then. August, not sure of yet. Depends on when we settle for an exact date for our event. September 13th, we already have 6 web design accessibility issues and how to avoid them. So that's already set up. So sign up at design4Drupal.org, and there's recordings available for all of the previous month's webinars. And if you have an idea for a webinar, send it to Boston@design4Drupal.org, or just reach out to Patrick or myself so we can schedule those webinars. Community events, so DrupalCon North America is coming up in June 5th to 8th in Pittsburgh. Actually, early bird registration is no longer open. I didn't update the slide correctly. Registration is open. So we look forward to seeing everybody there. DrupalCon Lille is October 17th to 20. That's in France. There are 2 weeks left to submit sessions if you're interested for that. So check out the links that are in the slide deck. Community events coming up. MidCamp is coming up on April 26th to 28th. I think they're going to try and do a little bit of it online, virtual, but it's primarily going to be an in-person event. May 11th and 12th is Stanford WebCamp. That is going to be an online virtual event. Drupal Jam 2023 Connected, that's in person. That's an international event. Drupal Camp Asheville is in person on July 7th to 9th in North Carolina. And tentatively hold the dates. This is the most recent, July 20 to 21 is what we're trying to secure the venue. I haven't signed the contract yet, so we can't officially publish that, but just save the dates, save those 2 dates. More than likely, those will be the dates for the in-person Design for Drupal event. And we'll definitely send things across social media and across our email list as things get decided. The community events page on Drupal.org, that's where you can find all the different community events, local meetups, trainings, camps, cons, all that kind of stuff. So it's Drupal.org/community/events. Code of conduct. Design for Drupal Boston, we follow the Drupal Code of Conduct. There's a link in the footer of our website. Please contact us immediately if there's any code of conduct concerns. Virtual webinars and things of that nature follow the standard code of conducts that in-person events would. So just make everybody feel welcome and included, and be nice to folks and let us know if there's any issues at all. Okay, so we've talked about, Patrick and I, about our 15th anniversary this year. So as you know, all these camps are volunteer-based nonprofits, so we definitely need help for an in-person event. I am looking for an event coordinator, somebody to take over all the scheduling, finding venues, making sure we have catering, all that kind of stuff. So if you're in the Boston area and can just help this year, and with an idea of maybe taking it over next year, that would be super helpful. I have a lot going on, and Patrick and the team, we've been doing it for a long time. We're looking for new people to step up and help us out. So we really need your help in order to continue Design for Drupal. It's been going strong for 15 years. We want it to keep going strong, but we need people to step up. So let us know if you can help us out. Thank you to our Gold Digital sponsor, Redfin Solutions. Our digital sponsors, EPAM, DevCollab, Atten, Elevated Third, Canopy Studios, Talking Drupal, 108 Degrees, and Pantheon. We will be reaching out. Donna Bungard, as Patrick said, is our new sponsorship coordinator. She will be reaching out to companies to sponsor our in-person events. So we will have all different levels of sponsorship, and that'll be announced within the next day or so as soon as we solidify that date. Spread the word on social media, hashtag D4D Boston. If you can help us, that would be great. And the Q&A, if you use the Q&A feature in Zoom, you can add questions and we will present those questions to our speakers. Patrick will at the end of the presentation. So thank you for that. And without further ado, I'm going to let Patrick introduce our speakers for today.
Thanks, Leslie. Yeah, and I just second Leslie's comment. We've been carrying this for quite a while, and we've just gotten help from Aubrey actually for the website of things, which is huge. Thank you, Aubrey. But like Leslie said, we could also use just a coordinator or a co-coordinator we'll even take. We can kind of hold your hand throughout the process. And then if you want to take things on later on, that's great. But yeah, we just need a little extra help to take care of some of that time-consuming planning work. So thank you for your consideration. And anyone who's interested in sponsorships, please reach out. Today's speakers are Adam Varn and Aubrey Sambor. Adam is a front-end developer at Lullabot who built his first website in 1997. So we have something in common there, Adam. In 2008, he began creating his first Drupal theme, learning the ins and outs of Drupal site building and configuration. Before joining Lullabot, he ran his own Drupal development company where he solved problems for nonprofits, advocacy organizations, local governments, and education institutions. Aubrey is a senior front-end developer at Lullabot who loves creating accessible websites using clean and modern CSS. I know this from firsthand experience. And she has her computer science degree from Indiana University and started her career building custom PHP web apps for clients, eventually discovering Drupal in 2008, along with Adam. Aubrey is also a frequent attendee at Drupal events. She enjoys contributing to the Drupal community and is passionate about design systems, accessibility, and the latest and greatest CSS techniques. Adam and Aubrey, take it away. And I should add, Aubrey has to leave a little early today, I believe, so Adam will be carrying the conversation after that.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for the introduction, Patrick, and thank you, Leslie and Catherine for inviting us here. We both really appreciate that. I know Aubrey knows the Boston crew, but I'm happy to meet everybody. So I'm going to kind of drive here. We're going to kind of be jumping around windows a little bit just because some of the stuff we're showing works in Firefox and some of it works in Safari and some of it works in Chrome. And yeah, so I apologize for the window jumping. So 1 second while I get there.
Yeah, that's the fun part about CSS and new CSS is that, well, things work in some browsers and not in others yet. So, yep.
Yes. So I was taking a look at the participants group and I saw some Florida people here. So welcome. This is a presentation Aubrey and I gave at Florida Drupal Camp back in February, but we've updated it because browsers are always changing and there's always new stuff out there. So it's a little bit updated. So if you saw it in Florida, it's mostly the same, but if you haven't, then there's a lot of new stuff for you. So I'll introduce myself, although Patrick kind of hit the big topics. I've worked in Drupal since 2009. I ran my own company, Hot Sauce Design and Development, from 2010 to 2021. I like working accessibility and doing front-end design challenges, which there are quite a few. I live in Tampa, Florida. Not very sunny right now, but it is warm. Yeah, I'm a co-organizer of the Florida Drupal Camp. I've attended all but 2 of them since it started in 2008. And myself and Amy Gina Heinlein and Mike Herschel are the co-organizers of that, and it's the best camp in the world, but that's just our opinion. Yeah, it's my first time at D4D Boston, so hi.
Hi, and I can introduce myself too. Again, Patrick hit most of the highlights here, but a couple other ones. I've been writing HTML and CSS for, I think, yeah, over 20 years. I've been working with Drupal since 2008, 2009. I live in Western Massachusetts, and it's currently sunny and windy. It's actually going to be like in the mid 70s here today, so that's pretty sweet. And yeah, I'm a volunteer at D4D and at Nerd Summit. The very first talk I ever spoke at was at D4D Boston back in 2009. So D4D holds a special place in my heart, and I'm really excited that it's going to be in person again this year. So yeah, that's it.
Oh, and also I forgot to mention we have our Mastodon handles on there. We both kind of abandoned Twitter. So yeah, feel free to find us on Mastodon.
Yep.
All right. So we wanted to kind of talk about some new-ish CSS awesomeness, things that have come along last few years, some very like in the last month, some 3 or 4 years ago that are just basically supported by pretty much every browser at this point. The container queries, not, has, is, where, and pseudo selectors using line clamp for your text, the layer properties, CSS Logical Properties, and a couple others that we'll probably touch on a little bit. But all of these are supported by major browsers except for Has, because Firefox is slow. You don't count IE11 as a major browser. So go ahead, Aubrey.
Yep, and then we're also going to talk about more things we want that might be supported in some browsers that might only be specs right now. One that is new to this talk that wasn't in the Florida talk is margin trim, because it's actually in Safari 16.4, so we can actually show that one off. Text draft balance, which I can't remember if that's also just in Safari or if it's in some other browsers, but that one's going to be another cool one. Actually being able to do container queries based on style, color contrast, CSS Subgrid, which is really great for being able to align everything in the same grid as the container, CSS Nesting, which will hopefully enable us to all get off of Sass and just use straight CSS. And CSS needs better comments because the commenting system, as I'll get into briefly at the very end, needs some work.
So I'm going to kick it off with CSS Logical Properties, or directions. We don't need no stinking directions. So what CSS Logical Properties is a way to think about changing. Instead of using margin left, you use margin inline start, and instead of margin right, use margin inline end. It basically replaces directions with block for vertical and inline for horizontal, and it can be used in on sizing for width and height, for margins, for padding, for floats. Right now in Safari only. I don't know if there's any much traction in other browsers for floats, but positioning such as top, bottom, left, right, and borders as well. It was fully adopted in 2017 by all the browsers, and it's useful for direction. That's the direction property and the writing mode property. So this is kind of like a higher level overview of it. So instead of using top, you would use inset block start, bottom inset block end, left inset line start, width. I'm not going to read each and every one of these, but you kind of get the idea. Like inline size, block size, max inline size, min block size. So you're basically just thinking of everything as a block and then like an inline element, which makes sense when you think about CSS, because if you start using directions, which I'll show in a second with why that can become a problem, it's not always flexible for everything that you might need, especially for different languages and different directions that you might need the text to go. And yeah, this is just a little bit more explanation. So margin left is margin inline start, padding bottom, and borders would be like border block start, border block end. So basically just to substitute margin of the padding or the border for or the direction for the start or the end for that. So why do CSS properties, logical properties, matter? So in languages other than English, such as Asian languages, it's incredibly useful because they don't always flow left to right. So you can actually use, if you're doing everything margin left, then you're going to have to rework it for a different language. It's an agnostic terminology, so it doesn't really have a problem with you're not stuck to left, right, or words in English that may not always translate over. And it works the exact same way as non-logical properties. So there really is no reason not to do it. It's basically left is inline start and right is inline end, and it does the exact same thing in every browser at this point. And the future you will thank you for that. So let me kind of demonstrate what I'm talking about here. So this is a little code pen, and we'll put our slides up here that have all of these links in them. But you can see that this box is just, this is basically the same boxes, but one is logical box, and I'll blow my font a little bit. But you can change, if you were to change the direction of this text, you can see like this is on the right, so those look the same. But see, if you change the direction, then now suddenly you have a bigger margin over here. Then like this one uses logical properties, so the box stays the same place regardless of which direction that you have. Right? Yeah. Well, it's positioned the same way. I'm sorry. So like the margin, see the margin over here on the right is positioned on the left. And you can change this to vertical. All right. Change the direction here. So like your box. See, this is not lined up as you would expect it to be. So it's really just one of those things that there's no reason not to use them, because other than retraining yourself, like for me, after having 20 years of CSS, having to retrain myself to do it was hard. But it with using Flexbox and with grid and everything like that, when everything is just you're working around a box, it's like the using the idea of left and right and up and down doesn't really make sense, or top and bottom doesn't really make sense as much anymore, and in my opinion at least. So yeah, Aubrey.
Yep. So we're going to talk about container queries next. This is something that I know I have been looking forward to for a long time, because media queries have been great, but I'd rather be able to control things at the container level and not just the viewport level. So this has been pretty great. So go to the next slide. It's defined with container type and container name properties. There's a few different container types. The one that I've seen the most is inline size, and it's based only on the inline size, but there's also regular size and normal. And the container name, I think it's optional, and you can use it later to define where you want to actually use the container. And then next slide. Here's an example of some code that you write when you're trying to define a container query. You can see the container itself has the container type and name. And then you have a call to action that's within the container that has a width of 33%. But I guess when the container is has a min width of 768, we want to make the width a little bit wider. So instead of having the width of the viewport be 768, you set the width of the container to be 768. So when the container gets bigger, that's when the size will change. You can see this in this CodePen demo below that's demonstrating how this works. So yeah, we have two containers here. One is going to, I believe, get smaller. You did this one, Adam. So I think, yeah, one will get smaller. Yeah, this one's a weird one. If you want to talk about this one a little bit, because you're the one who actually did this CodePen, that might actually help out a little bit too. But there's some styles that get applied. Sorry, I'll let you talk now.
No, go ahead. Yeah, the style is just basically as the size gets different. So like right here, they get bigger, column gets wider, and then that gets more narrow as you go along. So basically, the biggest thing, the best way I can explain container queries is a media query is great, but a media query reflects the entire page when maybe you don't need to necessarily change the entire page. You just want to change part of the page for a different responsive element. And that's the part where container queries come in, because it's basically like a more selective way of organizing your classes and style and selectors and everything in the when you're coding something, basically. So like this, this is basically like a media query without a media query. That's kind of the best way to explain it. Because container query is fairly new, I have not personally used it much in production sites for anything yet. I'm looking forward to doing it when I have a need for it. But as of right now, like on the current last few projects I've been on, I haven't really had a use for it, but I know I will at some point. So just the fact that it exists in CSS is very, very useful.
Yep. And then next up, we're going to go through a couple of these new pseudo selectors. I'm going to go through is first and then where. They're very similar to each other. So you can use is to simplify selectors to a single line, and it takes on the specificity of its most specific selector. I don't remember if I have an example of that somewhere, but other little funky things that is does, it has this thing called a forgiving selector list. So if you have, say, example is .cats and :kittens, :kittens is not a valid selector. In some instances, this would make the whole statement fail, but is will actually just be like, oh, kittens, that doesn't exist. See you later. And it'll select .cats instead if the .cats is an actual class in your project. And it also doesn't select pseudo elements, so that's kind of a bummer. But yeah. So here's an example of how you use is. If you need, especially if you want to have all of your headings have the same color, this is the way you would do it before, the top example. With is, now you can just do it all in one line because they're all just going to be the same color. So yeah, it makes it a lot easier, less unwieldy, and it's pretty fantastic. And this CodePen, let's see. I have some examples of how I've been playing around with the colors here. You can see that I've set the H1, H2, and H3 to all just be hot pink. And then I went ahead and set everything in the main and the aside to be turquoise out of the box. And then I have a special text that is going to override the heading. And that one is going to be purple because the specificity of special text is higher than the turquoise. So that means that heading there specifically will be purple. So there's still a way to be able to update with specificity without having to write a lot of like nested CSS styles and all of that. That again makes your code really unwieldy. So yeah, it's pretty great. And then next up is where, which again is exactly the same as is. The only difference it has is that it doesn't have any specificity at all. So this one is also an example of how to use where to style different things in different colors here. So you can see this example here, I have both is and where. Is obviously going to have these three colors. Where is going to have the purple. And then it's actually going to be easier to see this in the code pen. So if you want to click on code pen, you can see what I'm doing here. No, sorry. I'm like trying to talk it and I'm like, wait, I've got visuals here. So this code pen actually demonstrates the difference between is and where. So is, you can see all the colors are hot pink. So it's testing is in a header, section, and footer. And you can see I labeled them in there appropriately. And then I have the styled with where all the links are purple. And the difference here is with is and where is that I have a footer A set. So I want all the links in the footer to be green instead. It changes in where because where does not have any specificity. So the footer A is going to win with the specificity in the where list. It does not win with specificity in the is list because is actually does take on the specificity of its most specific selector because that is a tongue twister right there. So that's why the footer link does not turn green, but the footer link in the is list does not turn green, but it does in the where list. So just an easy way to demonstrate the difference between is and where there.
So this is also a pseudo selector that I'm sure a lot of people will probably already started once it came out. This one's been out for a little while. It's not just another boring selector. So it's been supported since IE 9 actually, but it's not supported by selector argument list. It's not supported by IE. So not cats and kittens. This needs to be written as not cats, not kittens. You basically can't chain things together with a comma like you can with is or where. The idea is basically that it does not accept forgiving selector lists like is and where, like I just said. So not is basically if you have, with CSS, we've always had this situation where like if you want everything to look the exact same except for this one thing in there. So you can, they all have the same classes, but you don't, so you want to find one thing that's not the exact same. So basically with this one, margin bottom for all your LIs, the last child is 0, but then if it's not the last child, you want the margin bottom to be 1.5. So rather than writing all of this, you can just write this. So yeah. And so this is kind of shows the same sort of thing. So here's a fun list. Here's one with the list item. There's no extra because this is the list with not. And so all of them that are not the last child have a margin bottom, but because last child does, this is basically the equivalent of saying li last child margin bottom. But you can use this for beyond pseudo selectors. You could do it if you have a list of a bunch of different divs and classes and you want to hit all of them except for this one. Like you can just chain it together and do it that way as long as they're valid classes. Did I hit that one right, Aubrey? Because you did this one. Yeah, okay.
Yep, you got it right. All right. And I'm gonna.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. I'm gonna be doing has. I love has. It's the best thing ever, except for the fact that Firefox doesn't support it yet, so I can't use it yet. So I'm a little disappointed about that, Firefox. So get on that, please. So yeah, it's essentially a parent selector. I know a lot of people don't like saying that it's a parent selector, but that's essentially what it does. So if you have a div and you say div has image, it'll select all the divs that have an image. And that is actually a use case I've had to support a lot. So it's going to be fantastic to actually be able to do this again, once Firefox supports it. And this is another one like is and where that takes on the specificity of its most specific selector. I need to figure out a better way to describe what that is because again, it's a mouthful. But pretty much if you're doing div has with an ID, that will have higher specificity than div has with just the image because IDs have a higher specificity than just elements themselves. And here's an example of how has works. It's the example of selecting items that have an image. So you can see by default, you know, the container is going to have a gray border with border radius and some padding. But if it has an image, border color is hot pink and there's no padding. And you'll see that example in the code pen.
Yep, I gotta switch over to Chrome because Firefox does not work. Hang on one second.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Come on, Firefox, get on it.
Okay, so
Yep.
we're in Chrome.
Yep, we're in Chrome, and you can see that there are 3 grid items in here. 2 of them don't have an image, and 1 of them does. So the grid item style, like you just saw in the screenshot, gray border with some padding. But if it has an image, I get rid of the padding because I want the image to go all the way across the container, and I want it to have a snazzy hot pink background. So this is a perfect use case for has, just so you're able to do this kind of thing without having to write a lot of like weird funky selectors or JavaScript or something that will just be messy. So this will be nice and easy.
Once it's in Firefox.
Yeah, once it's in Firefox. Can't say that enough.
All right, so many windows. Okay, so at layer. So this is also a fairly new one. So layer is a CSS at rule to declare cascade layer and can be used to define the order of precedence in multiple cascade layers. All right, so in English, that means it lets you set styling no matter where your styling is in the cascade. So it works either with set layer names or just unnamed. The layer itself could actually be an entire talk because it is incredibly complex with the things that you could do in the examples for it. If you just search for CSS layer examples, you'll find tons and tons and tons of them out there. But it is supported finally in all browsers. I think Chrome actually was the last one to add it, but they can be imported with each other as separate files. So yeah, this is kind of an example. Layers can be anonymous, so they have no names, or you can call them with a name specifically. The order declaration of layers determines the order in which they render in their precedence. So basically, you call your layers as high up in the document as you can because they're going to be referenced further down. So basically, we have styling in these 2 layers. Normally with CSS, you would think that this P color Rebecca purple or the red would override the main content color. So this would, we set it as P appears Rebecca purple, and we think red. But because so right here, if we flip the name around in the order, so right here with the order, with the layer order, that determines which one of these gets precedence. So you're basically changing the cascade of CSS within CSS by setting the precedence of the layers. So I'll show that in another CodePen demo. So they can be anonymous and no name. So right now, like I said, it's purple because that's the last layer listed. If I change this to now main content gets the precedence. Like I said, I changed that before at Florida Drupal Camp and forgot to change it back. So you can see like now this is how you would expect the cascade to work. But if I was to undo that and put it back, now main content is last because secondary content comes afterwards. You can also nest layers inside of each other. So you'd have sidebar inner, which is the sidebar over here. And that's the styling here. So I could say green. And then you can reference them by calling the outer layer, so the sidebar wrapper, and then you're calling the layer that's referenced inside of that layer. So layer wrapper, sidebar inner. So now I'm setting it here. If I was to, and it inherits these styles. So if I say border pixel solid red, then it will come. That doesn't get inherited until I call it, done here. And you can also import them from another file. So if you have a separate file, you can put you just name the layer, your theme file, then you name the layer the layer that you want, and that will basically import just that layer from that file. So it uses the import functionality that's already in CSS, but it imports layers. So the best use case for this, besides changing your order around of everything, is you could basically break out your CSS into individual files that you needed to, especially if you reuse a lot of the same code, and then just import all of them in with this. Import the parts that you want. So say you have a form that has all of your form elements on it and one that has all your links elements on it. You could just call and reference those because you don't want them on every page. You just maybe want them on the home page or something. You could call and reference each layer element separately instead of having to copy and paste them in there, or do something with SAS to import the files that way. Because remember, this is all just vanilla CSS. This is no preprocessors, nothing else. This is all just straight CSS, all the new things that CSS can do, which is really cool. Line clamp. So this is one of my all-time favorites. It's a little trick. Webkit line clamp is the other way to think of it. So it's a CSS property allows limiting of contents of a block to specify a number of lines. It works in combination with display property set to WebKit box or WebKit inline box and the web box orient property set to vertical. So this was basically a hack in Chrome that it's not officially part of the CSS spec, but it's been adopted unofficially by every single browser. So you could always have the caution of, don't use something that's not an officially CSS spec, but it's basically used by every browser at this point. Take it out. What is, if you've worked with Drupal and you want to, set a character limit or something, you have to go in there into your view and change the character limit. This, you can just do it straight with CSS. And the line clamp works, but also is meant to replace WebKit line clamp. And it shortens text, and it's still is present but visually hidden, so it will still show up for screen readers and things. And despite you can actually use WebKit line clamp in Firefox, and it will work as a selector. So you have to have these 4 lines. You have to have display WebKit box vertical, box oriented vertical. Line clamp, this is how many lines you want to show, and overflow hidden to hide it. You can also just do line clamp like that. So right here, I'm changing the 3rd paragraph 7 years ago to clamp 3 lines. And so what it's doing is only showing 3 lines of that paragraph, and it's ending it with ellipses. So if I just to 5, it's going to show 5. If I change it to 1, it's going to show just 1. So it's and if you don't put it here, it's not going to clamp it. It's just going to show the whole thing. So if you don't put the line clamp line in there, it's going to do that. But all of this, you have to have all of this, but this will all be supported in any browser, even though Firefox is not WebKit. Pretty cool. The things we still want in CSS.
Yep. I've got the first one, and this is the one that I'm the most excited about now, is margin trim. It's only supported in Safari and in Safari 16.4. I think it just came out a couple weeks ago, so I definitely wanted to add it here. And it uses logical properties to trim excess margin off of off of a container element, either on in the old terminology, the top and bottom or left and right. But since it uses logical properties, it's inline start, inline end, block start, and block end. The one that I've liked the most that I can't wait to use is this margin trim block end, because it'll remove margin from the end of the container. If you go to the next slide, I've got some code. So what this will actually do is replace the technique that we talked about in the not example. So if you click on the CodePen demo, it'll actually show it's pretty much the exact same demo. Yeah.
Yeah, hang on guys, for Safari.
Yeah, sorry. So many browsers. Everything needs to support everything.
Where are you, Safari? There we go.
Yep. So this margin trim example looks very similar to the example we used for not. The only difference is that we have the 2 lists. The one on the left has the extra margin below the item. So I'm not getting rid of it anywhere. You can see that the list items all have a margin bottom of 1.75 rems. The image or the list on the right has the class of list with trim, as you can see there. And so all I have to do to get rid of that bottom margin is say margin trim block end, and it's gone. And you set that on the container and not on the items itself that have the margin. So it'll have it go away. And obviously you can do block start if you have extra margin at the top, or you can do inline start or inline end to get rid of anything on in this example, left and right. So this is going to be awesome. The not example always felt a little kind of kludgy to me. So this is going to be a lot better once this is supported everywhere, and hopefully it gets supported everywhere soon because it's pretty great.
So Aubrey, just as a question, I haven't actually played with this too much. Do you have, so it's always just, there's no numbers involved. It's always just block or inline for start or end.
Yeah.
There's no numbers involved. Okay. And you have to define your margin, obviously, somewhere else at the top if you're doing it like that. Okay.
And Adam and Aubrey, it's Patrick. Somebody just asked or just mentioned that the yellow on black text is a little hard to read. It's coming through a little pixelated. It looks okay for me, but maybe just bump up the font size or something to see if that helps on the next slide. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Let me go, but I'm all dark mode all the time, so. Text wrap balance. So this is an idea that is out in it's in spec mode. It's not officially adopted anywhere yet, but Chrome is working on it. So it basically make each line of text roughly the same length. So anyone who works with a lot of text on a page, it makes the you never know how long the text is, especially with Drupal, where someone's going to put in there. So you don't know. So you might always have like a really long line and then some shorter lines below it. This will attempt to balance things out in empty space within each line, if better balance on wrapping is possible. So basically, this line of text would go like this. Now it just balances it out to make them even. Kind of similar how like text justify would be, but about all the spacing, spread out between it. So this is being worked on in Chrome. There's I think a few months from now as a goal out of it. It's actually moving pretty fast from prototype. But just because it's in Chrome doesn't mean we can use it everywhere else, although Edge seems to adopt a lot of Chrome stuff pretty quickly. So I would imagine that this will probably be around, maybe a year from now, depending on if Firefox jumps on or not.
All right, next up is Subgrid. It's only supported in Firefox and Safari. I need to double check that. I didn't update the slide to see if it was supported anywhere else now, but I know as of February, it was only supported in Firefox and Safari. And to add it, you just add grid template columns or rows, depending on which one you want to subgridify. Just add subgrid on any grid item. And this grid item also needs to be set to display grid, just because it's going to be a grid. And so you need to add that. So, so this is the example of the grid itself has display grid, and then the grid item set the rows to be subgrid, and then the display to grid. And then if you open up the code pen in either Firefox or Safari, you'll be able to see what I've done here. So I have a little banner on the top that says your browser supports subgrid. And I've got 3 cards right down below that banner. And I put it, the fancy supports is what's doing the banner on the top. So these 3 cards, as you can see, there's a title, some text, and I think I have a link on the bottom of each card. And if you're in
scroll.
Yeah, sorry, there's too much stuff. In a browser that does not support subgrid, all 3 of these wouldn't be spaced out evenly like this. You can see that the second card has a lot more content in the text than the other 2. And so the subgrid is allowing every single item within each grid within each card to be aligned kind of on the same grid axis, so that things aren't misaligned or anything like that. If there's more content, if one of these titles goes to another line, like things like that. So it's just a little thing that honestly probably should have been released with grid when it came out, but subgrid will make aligning things within the grid within a grid item a lot easier.
All right, so CSS nesting, and we're going to try to get through some of these fairly quickly because we're running out of time, I think. CSS nesting is coming. It's not quite there, but it lets you basically allows for nesting without a preprocessor like Sass or post-CSS. It works in the newest version of Chrome and Safari 16.5, which is the technology preview. That's the version that's not out just yet. But can work with and/or without, and also leverages is not function as well. Other stuff like layer, container, scope can also be nested as well. So if your browser supports it, this code will run as is, and I'll show you a demo in Chrome because I have Lewis version of Chrome. So this is, if anyone's familiar with Sass, this is similar to how you would nest things in Sass, but this is just, again, straight vanilla CSS. So you have the heading, with and, it also works without the and. This is the equivalent of writing box heading color red, box text line, all this. Yeah. And then I will jump back over to Chrome to show how it works. Up and close the JavaScript because we don't need JavaScript, right? Yeah, so because this CSS is actually nested within. This is within the selector of the and. So text is blue for this cat named Flora, and I'll say orange because that's a different color. Oh, no, it's not into here. Oh, there it is. Okay. So yeah, so we're just nesting it through here. So again, this is being worked. This work is supported in Chrome. Coming in Firefox and Safari. I imagine Edge will probably get it soon. And then, Firefox, hopefully, sometime soon. I mean, if you're working Sass right now, it's not a big deal, but this is useful if you want to move off of there because it'll still compile and, save work just as well without the preprocessors. All right. So color contrast is just an idea that I have seen floating around. It's not actually, of course, here's a presentation without my cat. He has to show up. So this would basically compare two sets of colors versus a defined background color. So it'd save a lot of time addressing alley issues, useful with CSS variables. It's still a spec draft, so no browsers support it yet. The idea of this would basically be, it would take these two colors and compare it against the background color, this background color you have here, and then it would set the background color to whatever you wanted, whichever one of these was had a higher contrast level, basically. So it's useful for, you could use it for high contrast mode, you could use it for, set your CSS variables to have different values, so it could basically get generated on the fly as needed, that sort of thing. So again, it's an idea, it's not out there yet, but would be really pretty cool because we want it. I'll wrap it up here.
And the last one we have, and this is one that kind of I really, really want, is being able to write comments like this in CSS. It is so annoying that we have to only use this other option as our only option. And come on, I guess, I don't know what's going to come first, comments like this or has in Firefox, but maybe one or both would be great to have. But yeah.
We'll include links to this slide, to the slide deck for this, but these are just some useful things that came up with. This was a list Chris Coyer put together of all the CSS wish lists at the end of 2023, which a lot of it touches on stuff that we've touched about. There's also way more stuff out there that people want, depending on their specialty and their focus. There's a whole bunch more viewport units, SVH, DVH, LVH, which are variable heights and dimensions, and then style queries. So adding a CSS style to your container query specifically. Yeah. Ta-da! So that's actually all we had right there. I see we got a few questions. I guess Patrick, is that the norm now? Do we just move to questions? Okay.
Yeah, I'll move you to questions. I have one real quick, just to start things off, which is that well, first, great presentation. Thank you. There's a lot to take in. And I'm wondering, we've seen the JavaScript community kind of pushing closer toward vanilla JavaScript once that sort of satisfies a lot of the requirements of people who are coding with it. Where are we at with CSS and something like Sass? Are we ever going to get to the point where we can just use CSS, or will Sass always kind of be there as something that kind of picks up where CSS kind of leaves off?
I feel like it's.
Yeah, go ahead.
I feel like I feel like people can use CSS on its own right now. I do feel like the nesting, once that's supported in a lot of places, that will move a lot of people maybe to plain CSS as opposed to using Sass. CSS custom properties, I definitely think was the big one that will hopefully allow people to move away from using Sass too. And yeah, Adam, I sounds like you had some stuff to add too.
Yeah, no, I think that there's always going to be someone who's not satisfied with something not being able to do it. Like, oh, I can't do this, so I'm just going to do my own language or do something else, come up with some other way to do it. So there'll always be a use for that. Like, I mean, Sasses have other useful things such as functions and a lot more complicated variables, and because CSS still doesn't do, other than calc, doesn't really do a lot of math oriented things. So if you have to calculate a lot of things, JavaScript is useful for that, or using writing some functions in Sass, it's useful for that sort of thing. But like Aubrey said, like CSS variables, you can use those directly with JavaScript to set a variable, to set a CSS variable that can be referenced, get generated through JavaScript and have it referenced on the page dynamically. So it's kind of like using JavaScript and CSS without using the awful CSS and JS. Yeah, so hopefully that answered the question.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Jessica has a question. How would you approach using CSS properties such as has in a production environment if they're not fully supported by all browsers? Would you consider using an @supports to provide fallbacks or alternative styles?
I probably would. I haven't actually used it in production because I do actually want to wait for it to be supported everywhere. So it just hasn't been an option yet. But yeah, you could use supports. I tend not to because it tends to add extra code to my my CSS that I might not want to add. And it seems like, I think Firefox is actually working on adding has. I think it's going to be in the next, maybe, forget what Firefox is on now. Is it at 111 now? I want to say maybe 114.
I think they're at
113
they're at 113 or 113.
Oh, they're 113 now.
115 is when the goal is. But I mean, how long that takes,
okay.
I don't know. I think they jumped from 111 to 113 pretty quickly. But
yeah,
I mean,
true.
it's definitely on the roadmap. They just haven't gotten real far. I think last time I saw it's about 30% there in terms of like all the backend code they have to do for that, for programming. But yeah, I would try to avoid using it. If it's something where you absolutely have to, you would probably just want to look at your markup and see if there's a way you can tweak the markup to make something that's compatible, at least for now. Because even when Firefox is supported, you have to remember not everybody's going to have the newest version of Firefox, the newest version of Chrome. So you don't want to build your whole site based on this one new feature that may or may not already exist in everybody's browser. Hopefully that helped.
Let's see, we have another question. For my site's logo, I use max width 100% and max height 100%. Is there any newish CSS settings for an SVG logo that would make it look great on all browsers, except IE, of course? Putting you on the spot here.
Well, you would want to use max width. Yeah, that would work. SVGs, I think to make it look the best, you always make sure you have an optimized SVG. Don't just like download one from somewhere and then run it through Photoshop and then tweak it that way. That's probably a good option to think of. In terms of CSS directly, you can get into like styling a SVG directly with like filters and things like that, but I don't know if there's really any way to make it look, with the width and height. I mean, you can make your containers more responsive. I can't think of anything else specifically off the top of my head that would make it any better. You're doing good.
Yeah, same. Same. Yeah, I was going to say, like, I can't think of anything new that's within like images or SVGs to tweak the width and height. So yeah, I think that's the way to do it for now still.
Fair. Let's see, Jay has a question. Do you see the @layers solving CSS reset problems, for example, modals that need to be themed separately?
I would think so, yeah. I was listening to the Shop Talk Show episode, the most recent Shop Talk Show episode yesterday, and they were talking about using @layer to kind of be able to pick out old CSS and things like that. So I do think there is a way to be able to use that to, isolate styles that you want to retheme and things like that. So I definitely think there's a use case there. I haven't actually ever used layer before, but it does seem very powerful, and it seems like that's a good way to kind of isolate styles, especially styles you're trying to kind of override and retheme to match the rest of your site like that.
Yeah, I mean, I would go along with that as well. I also think there could be a use case for it for using it for utility classes. So rather than having to install a whole framework like Tailwind, you could technically build out your own utility classes into these layers and then just import them as needed throughout it and keep your markup, pretty clean. I think also the neat thing about all these features that we've been talking about is that there's so many. These are just new things, but people haven't built a lot with it yet. So someone's going to come across, the line clamp, like who knew that was going to be a cool thing, but someone's going to find a way to build something with all this stuff that everyone's going to be like, oh, wow, I can do it with this. And it's not going to be that complicated. So I think that there's still a lot of more use cases for layer container queries that we haven't really thought of or encountered yet because, having started building websites since 97, things have changed a lot. So I think that there's going to be, over the next few years, a lot of development of people coming up with really cool ideas and things to use these things for that'll be very useful.
Definitely. Where are we at? You both build websites for a living. Like, where are we at with folks who are on this webinar building sites themselves and browser compatibility? Like, when you build a website, do you have sort of like a minimum bar that you're developing for? And does that reach into IE at all? Or like, do you have a cutoff where you're building your site specs at?
I've been lucky since I've been at Lullabot that I haven't had to worry about IE, but I believe Aubrey's project, she has to deal with IE 11 just because it's a larger client and, they have legacy systems and things like that. We try to do, at Lullabot, we try to do evergreen browsers, and I worked for myself. I tried to do evergreen browsers and possibly, maybe a browser back if I could. But because Edge, Safari, and Chrome are all on WebKit now, and it's just basically Firefox out there, they're all pretty much in line with each other. So like the days of having to worry about it works in IE6 but doesn't work in Firefox, like that's not as common as it used to be by any stretch. I still check every browser obviously because they all have their own little quirks, but I think that we other than having to deal with IE11, I guess it's all pretty much modern browsers at this point, which is good for development but bad for competition, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree. And we're finally moving away from IE11 at my client because we're implementing web components and those are not supported in IE11. So we're finally moving away from it. And I'm very happy because now we can use custom properties and all these things that are not supported in IE. So that's pretty great.
That is great. Well, I don't have any more questions from the audience. Leslie, do you have anything you want to add?
No, I just want to thank Adam and Aubrey very much for agreeing to do this webinar. I met them at Drupal Camp, Florida, which is a very good Drupal camp. But I'd have to say Design4Drupal might rival you for best. Just kidding.
Well, okay.
But anyway, thank you so much. Very enlightening. A lot of new things that you let folks know about that may not be there yet, but are coming, and things to think about as they develop their sites. So really appreciate it. Appreciate the time and thank you so much.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for having us. I really appreciate it, and thank you for the good questions. Those were always very, very useful.
Great. Yeah, we had a great turnout today too. Thanks, Aubrey.
Sweet.
Thanks, Adam.
Thanks.
All right, take care. See you everybody next time.
Yep. Thanks all.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.